Welcome to Access to Analytics, the show where we discuss everything data and access to data.
Welcome to the first episode of Access to Analytics. Here we discuss anything data, so which data use case we're working on, which data stacks we're using, but also what type of data we're using. And then also we'll discuss how data access management plays a role in your data tasks. To kick off this series, we have none other than Matt Weingarten. Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Bart. How about yourself? Thanks for having me here.
Hey, thanks for being here, Matt. Doing very well myself. Sun is shining for the first time in a couple of months, so we're coming out of the dark. That's always great. For the few that don't know Matt yet, Matt is senior data engineer at Disney Streaming. And before that, he was data engineer at Facebook. That's also when I met Matt. Honestly, Matt, I don't know where you find the time, because next to being a data engineer at Disney Streaming, you're also a proficient and highly productive writer. Every week you write a couple of blogs on Medium, right? High quality articles. You're also very generous in the knowledge that you're sharing on LinkedIn. You write about hard topics on data engineering, technical topics, but also on the soft skills that you need to be successful as a data engineer. And that's also probably why you have so many followers. You have more than 1,000 followers on Medium, and you also have more than 5,000 followers on LinkedIn, right? So what I'll do is I'll share the links to Matt's Medium and LinkedIn in the show notes. So Matt, where do you find the time? Because you're also director of a bridge club. Where do you find all the time?
Well, that part is actually, I mean, that doesn't happen very often, the bridge side of things. So that's pretty small. But yeah, finding the time to do all this, it's a struggle sometimes, but it's been a fun challenge to take on. I think in the last year or so is kind of when I started my Medium journey, and really started to get into like the content side of data engineering. And there is definitely a great community out there of people who are in the same area. So I've learned a lot from them, and hopefully I've been able to contribute the same.
I've also learned a lot from your Medium articles and your LinkedIn posts. Is this knowledge, is that something that you're learning as well, and then also immediately sharing? How does that look like?
I mean, that's really what I would say it is kind of for me. I'm somebody who's really passionate about learning and, sharing what I know so that others can up-level themselves the same. So I don't think any knowledge in data engineering should just be like held by one person. So some of the best practices and the things I've learned along the way is definitely what I like to share so that others can do exactly that for their use cases as well.
That's also why I invited you for the podcast today. What we've been seeing is that we're getting more and more questions about data access management, how to do role-based access controls, how to work with role inheritance, and so forth. So a lot of people are learning and also sharing their knowledge on data access controls. So Matt, you've joined, I think, Disney Streaming end of 2022. What do you do at Disney Streaming?
I've been at Disney Streaming for about a year and 9 months so far. But yeah, so in terms of what I do, I'm a data engineer here. I help support one of our teams for clickstream analytics. Mm-hmm. So we get a bunch of different feeds from a third-party vendor, which basically summarizes, all the activity in all the different media forms there are for Disney. So things like ESPN, Hulu, Disney Plus, all those things on the streaming side of the business. We help. We take those reports, ingest them, and then process that into a consumable form that other teams within Disney use for their reporting purposes.
Streaming data from Hulu, and how do these teams use that data?
There's a bunch of different use cases, like data science is one that uses it for their predictive analytics. There's some teams at ESPN who use this data to better understand what patterns they're getting from the users, so that they know how to cater their content accordingly. There's marketing teams who use our data. There's a wide variety of applications that come along with this, just because the media landscape is so huge.
So it's like using user preferences to personalize user experience, personalize the content that you're showing to the users, but then also using that data for marketing analysis.
Yes, that's definitely one of the use cases that comes out of it. Yep.
Yeah. So predominantly streaming data. Do you also use batch data?
We actually consume the data in kind of like a micro batch format. Basically, as we get like files, we process that on our end. So it's not like true streaming where we're being fed that data through streams, but it's about as real time as it can get, besides having the actual like streaming behavior that would come along with it.
Oh, brilliant. Very cool. And what made you go for the micro batches and not the streaming?
That's just a limitation of the actual like source data itself. Like if we can get the source data in like a streaming format, we would go for that. Previously, we were actually running it in a batch like daily format. And that gave us some like scaling challenges, just because of how huge the data set is. Now that we're kind of like in this micro batch format, we're able to process it much more efficiently. And we also have a better SLA around all our data, because now we can process all of it much faster than having to wait for everything and then do it all at once.
What type of data are you using then?
You mean like in terms of like what kind of technologies we're using?
So the data that you're ingesting, is it click behavior? Is it watch behavior?
Yeah, it's mainly click behavior amongst a lot of the different media forms, like various websites, various applications, mobile apps, all that stuff. That's what we're measuring on our end.
So you got a lot of click behavior across the different applications. You're ingesting that in micro batches and then using that, I guess, for personalized content, or is it to change the user experience? How are you using that data?
It really depends on which team is using that data, because we're kind of just like the team that actually processes all this for everybody. We'll do a little analytics on our end, but that's mostly to support other teams. So, people who want to know, like, hey, if people who are fans of this, what are the things that they're watching the most? So we kind of like will put those, we kind of figure out those relationships between the two things to see what kind of patterns we're finding in the data.
These are really interesting use cases, because everything is now about personalization. Definitely when it comes to content, when it comes to media, we want to show content that matches user preferences.
Yeah, people are not interested in looking at things that they're, that they don't have any interest in. So you want to use, all their past history to cater content towards them so that they can get what they want fast and they continue to use your applications.
Yeah, it's crucial, because when you watch YouTube, I've really tailored my preferences very well so that YouTube presents me the content I want to see. But then you watch one wrong video, and all of a sudden,
and then it'll give you a bunch of related videos that you have no interest in. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be very careful what I watch now on YouTube. So I guess that's less of an issue at Disney streaming. The models are slightly better there.
The thing with YouTube is, YouTube has a gigantic library of content, like billions of videos. Disney and all of its applications have plenty as well, but it's not on that scale. And I think they do a pretty good job of making sure that looking at one thing isn't going to just, completely throw all this other content at you. They try to tune it a little bit. So, you have to have an established pattern in place before they start recommending those things for you.
How does the stack look like? What technology are you using for that?
We kind of use like Spark as a processing tool. From end to end, we use that as our big data driver. We have we use Snowflake as kind of like our data warehouse, where all that data is ultimately stored. Like the final layer of that data where people will actually take that for all their purposes. That's where they can find that. We leverage AWS as our cloud platform, and use a lot of the different services within that. And then for some of the more ad hoc analysis we do, and some of like a lot of the jobs that we're setting up now, we've been using Databricks a lot for that as well.
Spark jobs, I assume you run them in Databricks.
Yes, that's where we've been shifting it more towards in the over time. Previously, we were using EMR a lot for that, but we're moving more towards Databricks just because we found that that is the easiest to use for us.
So reporting in Snowflake, you're migrating the Spark jobs to Databricks, and then I guess Databricks runs on AWS.
Right.
How does that look in terms of the data? So you got all that stream data, click data. Is that like personal data, considered personal data, or has it been masked before it enters
Right.
the warehouse or the clouds?
So what we do on our end, or well, not our team necessarily, another team within Disney, but they have like an anonymization tool where we can feed these data sets into, and then given all the different business rules for all the various fields, it will anonymize those as necessary, and then that's what we present to our users to use. So that's all been masked and hashed as needed, so that they're using that form of the data.
And do you de-anonymize it, or it remains anonymized throughout the rest of the life cycle?
For our processing, we don't have any use for like the unanonymized data, so we continue to use that. The data, the PI data, it's like only accessible within S3, and it also has a much shorter life cycle, so that we discourage access to that by all means. There shouldn't be necessarily any use case for that.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You want to keep that private and secure. So you got masked clickstream data in Snowflake, in Databricks, and S3. How do you manage access to that data, or is it everybody has access to everything?
So we follow like a federated role process. So we're big users of IAM for all our access within like the AWS ecosystem. So typically what will happen is for each team's processing or reporting on their end, they'll have a role that determines which buckets and which databases they have access to. And anytime you need access to an additional one, you have to go through the governance team, listing out your use case and why specifically you need access to this, and they need to approve that before you can go ahead and set it up with that. So no, not everybody has access to everything. It usually has to go through an established process before you can have that access.
Do you work with some kind of role inheritance, where you have some type of functional role that then can inherit more granular roles that define access to certain data objects?
Yeah, there is some of that too. Like, typically the way we have it is because we have our data. We have like all our processing spread across different accounts. And what we typically do is like our data is separated from our compute in separate accounts. And then what we will do is, the processing, whose IAM role is defined in one account will actually, have a trust relationship with the federated role that will determine, where in the data environment it can access. And then those two work together to process everything from end to end.
Yeah, and these federated roles, are they linked to a certain purpose? Are they linked to a certain project? Maybe a group in the organization?
Yeah, each team, each product is supposed to typically have like one role. And then, as you continue to add use cases to that, you can continue to build upon that. But like each team has their own one.
So it's a bit like RBAC, right? So the product that you're working on, the team or the team you're working on determines which federated role you can assume.
Right.
Yeah. And then so that is for IAM. How does that work for Snowflake?
So for Snowflake, the way it's done is typically, with the roles that you have within the Snowflake UI or your team role, because there are those too, that will have like grants with certain databases and schemas. So typically, whenever you need to have a new use case for that, you'll open up a ticket listing out exactly why, and then the governance team needs to approve, and then they'll be able to grant that access to you. So you won't have access to everything. You only have access to the specific subset that you need.
All right, awesome. And then in Databricks, you're working with Spark jobs. Does the governance team also manage the access for those Spark jobs, or is that a different process?
That's kind of just done at the individual like team level. For Databricks, we have like our group roles, which say which we can use in turn to say, oh, hey, only these groups have access to these jobs. So we just grant that to ourselves. Every team who's using Databricks, they have their own cluster, and then that cluster is using a role for which data that can access. So that's the way we've typically done it.
So you got the data governance team that has to process requests to assume new roles. How does that process look like? So from logging a ticket to getting access.
They've done a pretty good job of refining this over time. Before, it was a little more outdated, where we would open a ticket, they would approve it, and then we would have to manually make those changes. Now a lot of this is automated, so that when we open a ticket, it gets reviewed and stamped for approval. It will automatically create the code for that, and then it will deploy it, and then that will show up within like the next few minutes.
All right, cool. So you got a nice streamlined process, so you can get access to the data in a very streamlined and quick process. So you mentioned that upon approval, you send that to so the code get updated. Are you using Terraform for that?
Yeah, a lot. All our AWS infrastructure is managed through Terraform. So really, whenever we get new access, it's as easy as just editing a file and then deploying that change.
All right, awesome. And that's what we see almost everywhere, that for really granular data access management, teams are using Terraform, which is updated each time an access request comes in. Do they route the requests to data owners, or is it the core data governance team that has to approve every request?
It's really the core team. If they need to pull in people, they will, but they have a pretty good knowledge of the landscape and all the different use cases. So we can work closely with them to explain what's going on, and they're pretty good about knowing when to approve and when not to, and suggesting alternatives if there's a better one that's out there.
Yeah, interesting. So when do they propose alternatives? What scenarios do you have a better access control or a better way of granting access?
For example, if you're trying to pull all this from, some table that's kind of like, meant for one team, they might point you towards a more like parent level table where you can find those same columns that you need. That's kind of considered the gold standard. So they help route everything to the right place as needed. But generally, people have a good enough idea of what they're looking for, where that's not too much of a blocker.
They help you find maybe data of better data quality,
right?
For your purpose, right?
Yeah, we have we have like our gold data sets where we want to be encouraging people to use as much as possible, unless their specific use case has to be against some lower level.
Yeah, I see. And then have they already alternative ways of getting access in order to comply with least privilege access management, or have you had use cases where you requested access to a certain data set, but they kind of had to deny the access request because of privacy regulations? Has that already come up?
I think we've done a pretty good job about that. So like there kind of has been a little change, like internal change over time of like how we wanted to manage roles. Before, like each of the different applications within a team would have their own individual role. So those would be really, really like least access, because you would only specify what you need access to there. But that also was a little taxing on the governance side, because they had to have a lot more approvals in place. So now they've kind of expanded it out to having one role per team, so that there's less approvals, but those roles are also a little wider as a result. So I think this has actually been a good compromise. So it's easier for the engineers; they have to put in less tickets, and it's easier for the governance team; they have to go through less approvals. So we've kind of worked in that mindset for the last like 6 months or so, and that's worked pretty well for us.
So now you got a role per team. That saves you a lot of time in processing access requests.
Yeah, definitely.
So means that you get different access. Maybe it's a bit broader now. Did you also have to change your data model a bit, so that whatever data you exposes reflects more or is more restricted to the data that you need in a certain domain?
Yeah, this really hasn't, changed the way we've done things. we've had to make, a few changes to our application so that, we're pointing to the new roles and everything, but that hasn't really changed any way we've done everything. It was a pretty easy shift for everybody.
It's all about really limiting the time to access. You can stay and continue and innovate using data. So I assume that process for access requests using the federated roles, is it similar on Snowflake as on AWS? You're also working with federated roles in both systems?
Yes. So I mean, the roles within Snowflake, I think those are also managed in Terraform, if I'm not mistaken. And with those, we just add the necessary grant statements as approvals are made, and then continue to expand, what everybody has there.
It's good to hear that you have a data governance team that is on the one hand aware of the regulations and the standards. They know what you can do with the data, but they're also aware of the business context, so that you get these streamlined access requests. In general, it seems that you're very happy with the access request process. Are there things that you see that could be improved?
I think it's been, a pretty good process for all of us. I think one thing that, and I think this is something that we're definitely going to be working on. As a team, we've been pretty focused on like cost optimizations as of late, just like all the big tech companies are out there. For these things, we have certain guidelines that need to be in place for, for how long certain like PI data can be exposed before it needs to be like archived, so that, it's not directly accessible for all those things. So we need to like have a better like process of like overseeing that entirely, kind of like a guardian process that's like actually sweeping through all the different AWS accounts, finding what's not compliant, and then working with those teams on making those remediations as fast as possible. So right now it's like a lot of self-discovery, but hopefully we can move towards more of that like automated state where it can actually find those mismatches for us.
Cost management is a big issue for a lot of companies. I just read a blog where some companies are really reconsidering moving their analytical workflows on-prem. It seems like you're looking at improving retention management for cost management, so removing data that you don't need anymore. Are you also looking into cost access management for cost management?
Yeah, I think we are, because, we need to, those two are actually, not as separate as you'd think. They could work hand in hand with each other to, have fit both sides of the equation, where we make sure we have proper, access controls in place, but at the same time, we're also doing it in an efficient manner so that we're not driving up our costs.
Brilliant. So data access management, not only for privacy and security, but also for cost management.
Yep.
That's a very good conclusion, Matt. That's what we're seeing a lot. Companies are really investing in data management now, and cost management is a big driver, but also privacy and security. Very great chat, Matt. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with me today and joining us on our first episode of Access to Analytics.
Yeah, this was fun to be here, and I look forward to seeing how this series continues to evolve over time.
All right, brilliant. And thank you for watching. Bye-bye.